An often posed question in regards to Death Note's story was whether or not Light Yagami was evil. Some people thought he had a legitimate point and had improved the world. Yeah, no, he was legitimately evil. We can clearly see him murdering innocent people and laughing at it, such as when he killed Naomi Misura, whom he was needlessly cruel to by revealing his identity as Kira to her and rubbing it in her face that she had signed her own death warrant by accident. But there are still a few layers to it. We're not shown much of Light before he picked up the Death Note at the beginning of his mission as Kira, but what little bits we are shown in the entirety of Light throughout the Yotsuba arc paint a very clear picture of Light's personality before the Death Note. The first scene we should look at is the one of Light right after he kills a second victim with the Death Note. You can notice that Light genuinely has a breakdown over this, as he killed a man who genuinely did not deserve it. A biker who was harassing a woman on a street. Clearly not a good person, but that would hardly warrant death. Side note, in the anime the scene is changed where we see the biker and his friends ripping at her clothes, meaning they had much worse intentions than their manga counterparts, which does make Light's actions more forgivable, but this video is going to stick to the manga version of the story, so back to that. We can even see that Light admits that the man didn't deserve it. You can see the guilt in his words and his face. He even straight calls the Death Note evil, but then he immediately justifies his actions, that this is what he wanted all along. He even calls what he did to his first victim a service, who granted was a killer who took children hostage, so that's at least understandable. But this second guy? He never actually comes up with a defense for himself for his actions here. And after this scene, we see that Light has a massive ego, that if anyone dares challenge or question him, it enrages him. Take his impulsive murder of Lindell Taylor the second he got called evil, he lost it. Then, we later see when his memories are erased during the Yotsuba arc, that he condemns the actions of Kira, even if, as he notes, he has shared certain ideals with Kira. He feels he could never do the evil things that Kira has done. Light thinks he would never do something evil, and the mindset Light displays here is meant to give the readers a good view into Light, how he was before he picked up the book. And we even see at the end of the series, once Light gets caught, he speaks of his actions as if this was something he had to do. He has to justify everything. His mind simply cannot accept the idea that he could be wrong. There's a previous scene in this arc where Light describes Kira's mentality. If Kira wins, that means Kira will be remembered as good, and if he loses, Kira would be remembered as evil. That gives some actual insight into his mindset. Light doesn't stop because of some combination of guilt and ego. Light thinks he could never do something evil. Then Light used the Death Note. But clearly, because Light did it, it couldn't have been evil, because Light would never do something evil, because Light is justice. If Light were to stop, he'd have to admit that what he was doing was wrong, which is something he couldn't bring himself to do. His ego was just too great for that. Then his comment that he had to do this. It's the sunk cost fallacy. He believes with the first people he killed, he had to use this to clean the world, as he had gone too far to back down now. After those first two killings, the guilt was essentially too much for his ego to bear. But those aren't the only things to point to. The fact Light actually starts to take actual sadistic glee in writing names in the book. As I mentioned before, there are numerous times where Light is needlessly cruel to his victims who are not criminals, such as Naomi Misura or Ray Penber. Light will claim that he only targets evildoers, but as Light views himself as God in justice, therefore an evildoer would amount to anyone who opposes him, and opposing him just amounts to anyone who dares cross him or just does something Light doesn't want. A commitment to justice doesn't mean much if you can't see the idea that you could ever be wrong. There's no excuse at all for Light's sadism, but in a small defense for Light, there is a touch of tragedy to his story. We have to remember that Light was just a 17-year-old boy when he picked up that note. I think most people can admit that around that age, they may have had thoughts similar to Light, but in real life, for the majority of us, they remain just that, thoughts. We never actually end up acting on them because we know they were wrong, and most of us lacked the means to do so anyway. Now, we know Light wasn't a bad kid before finding the book from the Yotsuba arc, and as confirmed by the author, he would have grown up to be a successful detective had he not picked it up. But now, an emotionally detached and narcissistic teenager has the power to end lives by writing names. He had the power to act on those dark thoughts at the back of his mind, and they consumed his whole being, making him, in the end, evil. Light's story in the end is another cautionary tale of the dark path that being unable to admit being wrong and controlling one's ego can go down. And I think that's all I got. I like making Death Note videos, and I know this is one that gets asked a lot, so I wanted to give my 2 cents on it. Now, if y'all want to do me a favor by liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, and following me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you, and have a nice day.